Hello, and welcome to the premiere of REseeding in Correspondence, a new performance to camera by Jade Montserrat and in collaboration with Webb-Ellis. We hope that wherever you are in the world, you are keeping warm and safe. This is our opening online event of Unbordering, curated by Xavier de Souza, me, and the incomparable Alessandra Cinetti. This 3-day digital gathering brings the Performing Borders Live program and commissioned artists together to reimagine a borders-free, collaborative live art practice. Tonight, Jade Montserrat's piece questions what does it mean to survey and reclaim environments, our relationship to the land, and digital connections with communities of people seeking asylum. It's a beautiful piece, full of poetry and urgency, and we hope that you enjoy it. Please stay after the film for a live discussion with Jade and special guest, Chandra Frank. And if you'd like to ask any questions, please write them on the chat throughout the next hour, and we will collect them and pose them to the artist at the end of this film. There are live captions throughout the screening, and please be aware that this is a safe space. Any hate speech will be deleted, and if you need any support, please write it on the chat, and one of our team members will be there to assist you. Thank you in advance to our partners, the Live Art Development Agency, Counterpoint Arts, East Street Arts, Queer Arts Project, HowlRound Theatre Commons, and the Arts Council of England. For now, sit back, relax, and enjoy, and I'll see you on the other side.
REseeding in Correspondence. Alice Walker writes, guided by my heritage of a love of beauty and a respect for strength, in search of my mother's garden, I found my own. Bathed in afternoon light, artist Jade Montserrat, a brown woman with hair in an afro, scrubs a wall blackened by charcoal drawings in her studio using a wooden-handled brush. She wears a white-ribbed cotton, mid-thigh length, short-sleeved dress. A light mounted in the centre of the wall is brushed and cleaned and is later masked out by a piece of mousy-coloured sugar paper. The right-hand charcoal wall drawing panel reads, "Perpetual renewal felt as a triumph for life." Tallulah is written by another hand, almost imperceptibly, between the words felt and as. The film cuts to several angles as Jade performs making the walls clean, good, and white again. The left panel reads, "Expendable bodies in unspeakable isolation." Unspeakable is written almost illegibly. The charcoal text panels haze and fade as they are brushed down. Occasionally Jade uses residues of blue tack left underneath the drawing to lift off other pieces of the adhesive found at intervals along the wall. Seemingly soft cascades of carbon make dancing shadows, breezing flecks, blows and puffs. Slats of warm afternoon light project through the blinds at the window, drawing bright linear chunks over body, wall, fabric, skin.
I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing to wet it first.
She uses a loofah to wipe the walls down. The wet loofah marks the sooty membrane of the wall, making iridescent smears, and as a sweeping motion paints a water rainbow, the reflection of the vehicle across the street becomes visible. Bubbles of tarry water dribble down the wall like baby lava. Camera angles make a collage within the frame. This collage of camera angles lasts for 26 seconds before resuming one frame. She mounts a stool to reach the highest points of the wall. Another frame window is laid over the footage of Jade. The frame collaged atop is that recorded by Ange, honing in on Jade's middle body as she moves towards him, wiping the floor clean with an old towel. Jade attaches the flock to a metal roller tool. Her nails are chipped with red polish. She rolls the wall with white paint. As she paints, the technical film collage of earlier returns. Resuming one angle in the frame, notice Jade's skin spotted with white emulsion. Daylight fades.
Okay. To come back when it's dry, otherwise I'm just...
She returns at dusk. Her shadow looms dense against the wall. The screen splits in half, showing two angles of her dancing shadow. Jade is filmed from a greater distance than before, outside in the garden. A white orchid in bloom is barely visible on the windowsill, given dusk setting in. The studio is panned and scanned jerkily. A shelving unit, sink, boxes, clothing, scissors, tables, a tray, a cabinet with various ephemera, fabric and boxes, and books. The wall drawings from earlier have not yet been removed from the studio wall. Jade looks into the camera before steadying it towards her to face the wall. It is 1:32 a.m. Jade stands in front of the camera wearing grey jersey short shorts, a peach tee with black edging, and a satin bonnet on her head. Squatting, she aims her phone towards the video camera and takes a shot. She carries a bag of Yorkshire Gold compost to rest against the wall and, using scissors, cuts into the bag towards her. She jigs and moves her body to the beat as she prepares her task ahead. She opens a brown paper bag full of biochar and makes general adjustments to the setting. Concentrating on dancing for a wee while, she makes stuttering, beat-harmonising movements.
Calm. These days sometimes they calm. The stage burns hot, no calm. I need to keep working on calming down. Close my eyes, deep breath, make me sleep on it. These problems creep off, but they only be in my head. So I'm leaving it there. Like on good or bad. Which one's which one's that? Left one's right, my wax went wrong. I was upside down, thank God for the songs.
Suddenly she looks at the palms of her hands. She walks out left of frame, returning with 2 lit candles which are placed on the floor.
Some very important people have released some, really vital music. So I'm going to be playing some of that stuff. I'm going to be playing new music as well from some legends. We've got a brand new Charles Tolliver album, the trumpeter who created the Strata record label with Stanley Cowell. We've got a brand new Sun Ra, directed by Marshall Allen.
Again, she walks out of the frame. The room blackens. The room is candle lit for a short moment before the spherical photographic light is switched on at the plug. The handheld camera records Jade's studio setup. Seeds, tools for cutting, and essential oils are laid out on a tray. In front of the tray, 5 bowls are placed in a line on the floor. By now, it is the early hours of the morning.
Why buildings are burning is because this city, this state would prefer preserving that white nationalism and that white supremacist mindset.
Jade points the camera view towards her. She wears a black sleeveless cotton dress.
This is BBC Radio. BBC News at 3:30. I'm Nikki Cardwell. Officials say 128 deaths linked to COVID-19 have now been recorded in the UK in the past 24 hours. That takes the total so far to 42,589. The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has described as hypocrisy a resolution condemning racism passed by the UN Human Rights Council yesterday. He said the council should focus on what he called systematic racial disparities in member countries such as Cuba and China. In the Premier League, Leicester and Watford both scored injury time goals.
Sitting on the floor in the middle of the frame, in profile, she washes and wipes her feet.
Live on BBC television since 1988. And people are being urged to stay away from Stonehenge ahead of the summer solstice. English Heritage has closed the site because of the pandemic. Instead, there are plans to broadcast live footage of tomorrow's sunrise online. 6 Music News, your next update is 4:30.
This is BBC Radio 6 Music. Now.
The film cuts to the bowls placed now on the tray, all of which have seeds in, and the identifying packets wedged underneath each vessel. Seeds fill the frame. The film cuts to Jade sitting cross-legged on the floor. She dances and gesticulates along with the music while shaking the seed packets about. Jade measures out seeds into smaller envelopes.
Inside you, flow a tree and flow assist.
Dawn is breaking outside. Jade zooms in and out on the completed array of compostable pots filled with the little envelopes of seeds. The detritus of her night's work is visible on the studio floor in the morning light. The camera roves around the room before departing from it into the adjoining corridor and focuses on a vinyl wall text, an artwork made by Hussein Mitha, which reads from Brecht, "In the dark times will there also be singing." Yes, there will also be singing about the dark times. Jade holds the camera in her right hand as she shuts the inside door of the porch with a cigarette between her fingers. A candle still burns on the windowsill. Picking up her cup of tea, she makes her way outside into the garden and steps down into it, where standard, mostly pink and red, roses grow, and a square bed in the middle of the lawn homes nasturtiums, sunflowers, sorrel, beans and peas, and night-scented stock, and calendula in various stages of growth. There is a connection between ourselves and the earth. This line, or connection, like our communications with one another, is drawing. A healing body also heals the garden. There's friendship between the two activities, our creativity in the garden and our creative selves. Jade hand-scythes a stretch of bedding in the overgrown backyard of her new home. A frayed flag depicting a white Yorkshire rose against a turquoise background flies beyond the stretch of bedding. Jade wears a turquoise shift dress patterned with large white flowers, an orange wool hat, green garden gloves, white tennis shoes. Shortly, a neighbour enters the frame and has a brief exchange with Caitlin, who steps out from behind a bush.
Hello, you alright? You got any plans with this?
Yeah, Jade's just preparing, I think eventually she'll plant a garden here and make it nice. She says it's nice. Yeah, definitely.
I'm just going to drag our bin to the shed so it won't be on the way. You'll be taking your things right back later.
Yeah. Thank you. You look so good, Jade. Thanks, you too. I love this outfit. I love this shirt.
Our sun sets through the blinds of the studio, a glowing and slatted oblong on the freshly painted wall. The sounds of Jade, Caitlin and Ange sharing dinner in the garden can be heard over the credits.
So I'm going to get myself a plate.
Like a plate and a bowl with or you can put them on the same plate. It's big. I don't know.
They're cute.
How did it go? Good. It might be different. You know what I mean? This is a product of the coming together of things. You gave things with it. I don't know how much you want, but you can get. Yeah, that's too much. And then.
It smells amazing.
Well, how do you feel getting rid of that?
It feels a bit weird.
Yeah.
A bit sad.
I can imagine it's chucker with you. There's another one of them I can cook.
It's amazing. Thank you.
on our shoots.
Welcome everybody, and thank you so much to Jade for sharing this wonderful work with us. Such a pleasure to witness it this way. So I'm going to delve into the questions that I have for you. But I also wanted to remind the audience that you can ask questions as well. There is a little icon chat bubble on the top right corner of the video. And after my conversation with Jade, we will be taking a couple of Q&A questions. So definitely leave your questions and comments there, and we will make sure to come back to you. So Jade, thank you so much. I am going to just delve right in there. I've been excited to talk with you. And I wanted to start with the idea of correspondence. So I wanted to ask you, who are you in correspondence with in the work? And also, could you speak a little bit about the multiple forms of narration in the film?
Sure. Thanks so much. Yeah. So the idea of correspondence, I think, yeah, is grounded in the inability to sort of meet. I think that obviously original plans thwarted called for a way to connect, and I know how much Nice Post, you know, means to me, and it also corresponded with MAFWA's. They were handing out packs, or they were ensuring people had their needs met in the community. So it was adding to that as well, I think. Also, it's sort of, because I noticed you used re-assisting in one of that as a way of titling a recent exhibition maybe of yours. But this idea of returning is something that runs through my work generally, but also for me, it stems back from me growing up in a legal environment. So I would often read letters that started with re. So that for me was a sort of play on a word. I think the re indicated or bracketed the correspondence a little bit. Your other question was about narrative.
Yeah, I really love the different forms of narrative, but obviously you as a narrator as well, being introduced to that, I think created a really intimate experience with the work for me.
Thank you. Yeah, intimate for you. I think at some points watching back just now, you know, and at the time watching it was, you know, it's cringy, a bit embarrassing. But I think that if anything, the film as a thing is sort of, as with a lot of my work, a vignette or a starting point, or something that can be expanded, an idea that is coursing through not just my work, but a way of being perhaps. And so for me, there are also ways to begin a larger project or a larger exploration. So I'm interested in how that as an entity can maybe begin to create a fiction, so that I would be creating a new narrative from maybe the text, or what's happening. What's been really helpful is ensuring that that from now on in, and I can't really see a way why I would be making film without an audiovisual description accompanying it. So I think for me, that really highlights the potential of multiple narratives, but also I'm looking at Michael Rothberg's idea of multidirectional memory, and this allows me to contextualize this, these parallel narratives or parallel histories or converging histories as well, which I think also maybe links to your research around waterways, I'm not sure, but the fluidity, but actually maybe the film obscures the major narrative, which was that there was this correspondence actually, because it's not necessarily made apparent in that, apart from like the credits, or it's, yeah, which is a shame, perhaps.
I mean, I think, yeah, the different forms of correspondence, but also narration indeed do allow for a certain kind of fluidity, but I think it also really speaks to your intention. Would you speak a little bit about the background, I think, in other writing around the film, how it came forth out of this workshop, and thinking about ways to really connect, right, during this time where physical connection is not necessarily possible. So then us seeing you making the seed packages that you then actually also like send out, I think is also a way that for me, it feels like there's a different kind of liveness to the work and to this idea of community. And yeah, thank you for also linking that to some of my work around waterways, which I've also definitely thought about waterways specific to the context of Amsterdam as different like streams and forms of being and narration and contemplation. And I think that relates a little bit to my follow-up question, which is about drawing. Really, really loved this phrase. I've been thinking about it all week around drawing as a mode of being. And I wanted to ask you if you could elaborate a little bit on that, as well as talking about the importance of working with charcoal and like the experience and also what we see in the film, of course.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that also came later, after we'd done the first two scenes, or the first two sort of vignette things. And it wasn't a great success in as much as I made the workshop on the phone. I'd just moved and my internet was poor. Yeah, I would just like to set the intention here that there will be a follow-up in time. You know, I don't, yeah, I'm quite hopeful that that would happen. I haven't mooted that with anyone before, but I've thought about it a lot because, yeah, I really wanted to, in the outcome, I think maybe I really wanted to emphasize the labor that, or labor that goes into our general being, I suppose. And the drawing itself, I hoped would speak to the moment and also the community that I would be in time workshopping with. Sorry, what was the main core of your question?
No, this is just great. I think it's just great for all of us to hear a little bit more about the process. I mean, I enjoyed how you spoke about drawing as a form of being and connection, and just seeing how you brought that into the work, even just kind of the focus on like the loofah and like all of these kind of the materiality of that. Like I really appreciated how we also got to see what the material of charcoal in this sense does as a form of how you spoke about drawing as a form of connecting and being.
Yeah, and it's something actually that is spreading, which I'm really happy about. So we're opening an exhibition in Manchester called Constellations, Care and Resistance. And the curator that I'm working with on that, Nikita Gill, broached the idea that she would, because we're distanced, and I won't be going to the gallery, you know, that she will use the charcoal to write on the wall in the main exhibition space to elucidate on that idea of the vitality, I suppose, that the charcoal can express and be used to connect one another. It was funny in the workshop, one of the participants had thrown the charcoal away, not knowing what it was. And unfortunately, I tried to cram a lot of information on the handout that went along with it, and so obviously, like, you know, it isn't a material that's necessarily in everyone's household, and I really enjoy using it, and I also enjoy using it as a metaphor. And the drawing, again, I connect utterly with language and time and movement and choreography, but maybe it's just because I'm obtuse and think that I can do everything or anything, you know, like maybe I'm too old to think that, but like as working as an artist, I've gone from feeling very unconfident describing myself as that to thinking that the possibility of creativity, that something that is a potential for potentially everybody, is that it can interconnect with every field or discipline, and also the roots of that come back to drawing, right? We use script, we're drawing all the time, but I think of it in that conceptual sense as well, as totally interlinked with performance or writing or anything. Yeah, it's obtuse.
Yeah, I love that idea of drawing as a way to even kind of create an interdisciplinary practice and experience, and something that really cuts through, but also what you said about the idea of language and how important that aspect is, also to just kind of like create a different kind of affinity even with the words, because they don't fully like erase from the wall, or they blend, or they become something else.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I can link it back to history of art or 20th century art, like, and my aspirations when to make, when I would see like the possibilities that a painting, like a raised painting by Robert Rauschenberg and de Kooning, you know, like at that point, but the narrative at that time was that when I was learning about those was absolutely male, white male, European male oriented. So what I can do with that is then divert a narrative and then be thinking about new potential histories, and then I can potentially talk about my connection with an artist like Phoebe Boswell, you know, but also it gives me, again, maybe really obtuse, that it gives me the opportunity always to like be hammering home what I think is essential, and I have a maybe displaced sense of responsibility to certain things, and but I hopefully the core of it is the intention is okay, but I think that any opportunity that I can get to sort of talk about marginalisation, or just total sort of scrapping of creative subjects in the national curriculum, or climate disaster, you know, these materials and the way of using them gives me that opportunity.
That's great. Thank you so much for elaborating on that. I also had a question about the film opens with a quote by Alice Walker, and it's also inspired by In Search of My Mother's Garden. And I really appreciate it. I mean, of course, the work is also titled REseeding. So it's an interesting way to start thinking about the garden soil, but also the cycles of seeding and growth. As a really another important layer and narrative in the film. And then of course we also see you in the garden. And I just wanted you to speak a little bit about how you were inspired by Walker's work, but also how you have clearly very much made the connection to gardening and seeds your own.
Thank you for asking that. Yeah, it's taken me 3 years properly to get to grips with that text, I think, maybe just under, but you know, 3 years for me to sort of feel the screams of it. I think maybe I fluctuate in being receptive to sort of, well, those grounding ideas that the instinct that I have has a lineage. I just have grown up without that lineage. That's also sort of connecting to that. The soil allows me to do that. That text was introduced to me by Lorraine O'Grady, which is my biggest name drop ever, who came to I was doing wall texts behind the scenes. It wasn't public, and she told me about the text, like very sort of matter-of-factly, but profound, you know, and I'm really grateful to her and for that. I think that observing or sensing or feeling any sort of violence around you, and then being able to articulate it, or the history of that, or the urge to make, and the being having any restrictions to that creativity and freedom, it's incredibly generous to, you know, write that down, knowing how difficult I find it to write anyway. And so that text has been really, really useful in locating the urge and also understanding it and honouring it, I think. And I think it links back to previous to that, Evan Effakoya, an artist, also introduced me to Edward Glissant's Poetics of Relation, which I've got here, and I think a lot of what I'm trying to sort of offer harks back to writings like that, or Catherine Yusuf's more recent book, A Billion Black Anthropocenes or None. Sorry, I've completely veered off. I don't know what you asked.
No, that's exactly, I think it's such a powerful way to think about also the kind of how coloniality and is embedded within these histories of landscape and soil and earth, and then kind of thinking about that in the context and reverberations of that also in the UK, right? And kind of how you also have spoken about place and thinking about your kind of situatedness in working with the British kind of landscape, which is I think very different to let's say like doing this kind of work in like a London like garden. So having that kind of relationship to soil and earth and different like ancestries, I think really rings true in how you're bringing in Alice Walker and Glissant, and just having those broader conversations about the kind of ecosystem and Blackness, and thinking about that importance, but then situating it within like a UK context.
Yeah, absolutely. And diaspora, I suppose, is there's this sense of solidarity in sort of thinking about the earth, just thinking about it, I suppose. And I like that there's that literature is really helping me formulate and connect in that way, for sure. Yeah, these there's a guy called Guy Shrubshrol, who has done a lot of work and written a book around land ownership here, and I think that there's land misuse, you know, and earlier today I was on a panel with Carol Wright, and who had organised it, and she was saying she lives in London, and yeah, how spaces are open, public spaces are policed, and so I think that there are parallels and differences in the city, and in, you know, because we are very lucky, or I mean, I consider it a right to be able to roam, you know. I had the privilege of living in that kind of environment where no one was going to tell me really to get off any land, and I have experienced both sort of, or that locally, I just mean that sort of in that very contained but very expansive environment. But I also recognize how violent these spaces are. So whilst I could explore and have what panelists were talking about this morning, exploring in Jamaica, and knowing different herbs and plants, and knowing their medicinal benefits, etc., which is something that's come much, much later, and my own learning really, where the sort of environment that I grew up in was very tied to this sense of ownership. And what I'm acutely aware of is that, having seen that and been able to observe it and critique it, or really sort of reject it, it rubs against the fact of not belonging, or not having a home, or displacement, which I'm incredibly fortunate that it's located here, but I hope that the film sort of treads around that, but I'd like to make that more explicit somehow.
Yeah, I think what is also really powerful about the work is that it takes place, the majority of it, like where we just see you like at home in your studio, where you're like, where you clearly are kind of showing us this kind of ease around, like, your space. And I just like enjoyed also the interior experience of that, which I think is also really powerful, especially if we kind of consider like the violence and hostility of like white art spaces, or like even performing work in those spaces. And just kind of having the work materialize in different ways within that space, and within your interior space, I think was really powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have a couple of audience questions that I think we are going to try and get to at least a couple of them. Thank you everybody for asking questions, and thank you, Jade, for like engaging my questions. So appreciate.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. So there's here are a couple of audience questions. So there's a question from Kalina. Thank you, Kalina. How do you perceive power relations between ourselves as human bodies and the earth as a unity of non-human bodies? Is there a shift in those if we change that to the earth as including human bodies?
Oh, thank you for your question, Kalina. Maybe I perceive relations as yeah, I think this stems back to what we were just talking about, maybe of ownership. Like I have realized recently that I am not able to imagine very well. And so I maybe create sort of really black and white visualizations in my head, which are limiting, and I'd like to know how to sort of expand my thinking. But I just sense that the sort of crux of your question is the idea of power at all. So and returning to what you and I were speaking about, Chandra, this idea of fluidity. It's not I wonder if you see where I'm heading with that. Like I'm just not, I perceive us as holding power, and that it requires the shift. I don't know whether that would be if we change that to the earth as including human bodies. Not sure. Don't know. No. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think these questions are really great. Thank you, everybody, for posing them. We have another question from Iris about intention. Intention, and using this word, what is the intention? Presence of being as an artist in process, or are you consciously creating a visual art piece? Are you dictating?
Yeah, I mean, my work is always sort of process, but my personal problem is that I don't divorce myself from my practice or my process. So I was thinking about this today, like if I was just a writer, maybe I would be, as I'm doing, I suppose, all the time, like extracting, I'm taking, sort of consuming and wondering how I can bring it into my own work. So my intention is that I've got a drive and I'm satiating that drive, but my drive is part of my living, part of intending to live, until I don't, you know. I don't know, I hope I'm not dictating anything. I'm consciously creating a visual art piece, yes. Yes, I am.
I think that little bit what you said around intention also links back to some of what you said earlier about labor, thinking about the different forms of labor in practice. So I think that's a really great way of kind of thinking about the different forms of intention and how they're related to the different forms of labor that you bring in to the work as well. And yeah, which I really enjoyed. There's another question from Mary. Would you mind saying something about your use of time in the film, the timing of the audio description in relation to the action, the sequence of the shots, daytime, nighttime, and so on?
Sure, thank you. I have really bad time management, as when we met earlier, you know, at the moment I'm struggling to behave like an adult and do simple things for myself. So when it came to making those two, the two first performances to the camera, there were certain time restrictions. I had to get those packets to somebody who's collecting them the next day, very kindly collecting them, and so I had to do it that night. But when it came to making what you've seen, which is down to the editing of Caitlin and Andrew, and which I love, it became clear that we could make this collage, and that's where I'm really excited by this idea of a performance to camera collage, that you can then sort of play back and sort of play with the time. Yeah, there's some, I was recognizing when we were just watching now about that with the audio description, but I can't put it into words right now. I'm sorry, Mary. Thank you for your question though, because it is really important, I think, as we made the intention to, you know, try and make a series of performances, but they, I suppose this also goes back to Iris's question, like, they also weren't really performances as well. They were quite sort of practical, what you were saying about labour. And I think labour can be also very sort of invisible. So I was really thankful that I'm in a position that I could capture that, you know. I don't have to you know, work any of those jobs that I've done in the past where you're up at like 5 o'clock or something, and then, you know, putting things on racks for people to buy or whatever it is, you know, like, or cleaning or whatever. So time in relation to invisible labour, I think, was really something that I have in mind.
I think that's great. I think, I mean, I definitely also felt that the experience of how Mary spoke about daytime and nighttime and the sequence of the shot, just experiencing temporality in that sense in the work, and just kind of yeah, having that fluidity of time with you as kind of like one of our narrators was a really important way of rethinking maybe of time as well, alongside thinking about the seeds and the cycles and the growth. So I definitely was seeing some connections there that I enjoyed, even watching it multiple times. We do have another question, a follow-up question from Mary's question. Could you speak about the use of framing and the shifts of points and levels of perception, as well as your process of connecting and transforming space? And this is a follow-up question from Kalina.
Sure. Thank you so much, Kalina. Sorry, I was just thinking about, there's the framing that there's the framing in terms of like Alice Walker and the text, and that's happening with the audio-visual description, I think. But I think there's also something I'm aware of whereby there are sort of these close-ups happening as well. And I think that that's something that happens in the work I've done previously with Webb-Ellis and the work I do independently on paper. I think obscuring somehow or honing in on an area of a body can lead you into making connections possibly that aren't connected to one's body. The process of connecting and transforming space, I think, is something that is just that I've got a sort of sensitivity. I don't know whether I've just cultivated it or what, to space, in as much as there are certain spaces that I just really don't want to be in. And so I think that part of what I'm trying to do is also appreciate spaces that have potential or for what they are as well. And it's something that binds us all together. You know, we're sharing this space. Thank you, Kalina.
Such great questions. Thank you, everybody. There's a question here for me related to your work, which I'm happy to speak to. How do I see Jade's work situated within the arts context and discourses I'm experiencing in the US at the moment?
Thank you, such a good question.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I mean, I feel like in many ways, even though it's happening in different iterations, there's like an important interconnectedness between the UK and the US, and there's always been historically. I just think in terms of just like the exchange of different like Black arts movements, but also during this political time, I think for me, I've been really moved by artists who are forced to, but also within that space are creating different kinds of conversations and dialogues that are really important. And for me, I think one theme that we haven't spoken about, but that maybe you want to speak a little bit about, is the theme of care. Because I think what we're seeing like in the US, but also definitely in the UK and globally, is really how Black, Indigenous, and like migrant communities of color have been impacted so much by COVID-19, and how we're like having to ask different kind of questions in terms of care and what that looks like and how we care, how we practice it, but also that element of collectivity and how, you know, I think that's a theme that comes up so much in your work, and what I think is powerful in some of the art world as well in the US is like that there needs to be a real question about the kind of reimagination, the restructuring from, you know, the world of time and productivity in which you're just kind of churning out these art pieces, and just kind of thinking about how do we collectively do that work. So from being in the US, currently in Cincinnati, which you see the treescapes behind me, I think that's one of the themes that has come up the most, just like attending different conversations on Zoom and just being in conversation with artists and curators. I think the theme of care has been even more kind of centered. And I don't know if you want to say a few closing words about the role of care or how you approach that within your practice at the moment.
Yeah, I think care, for me, is guided by those around me, to be honest. That I'm not, I can't really speak for, I'm trying to be as careful as possible, whilst aghast at a lack of care. And it's quite, I think, yeah, that it's all around this idea of reciprocity, I suppose, that we're nothing without one another in some way. Like I really personally crave my own time and my own space, and you know, but I'd be nothing without the care of others. And yeah, it was quite interesting earlier. Nikita had sent me a news item about social distancing and not being touched, or not having and not perhaps being able to read one another's faces and these kind of things. And I think that if anything, being sort of, well, being by myself in my home all the time for so many months means that it just magnifies, and yeah, the care that is being extended globally, right? We're attempting to care for one another in extreme circumstances, and that gives us, yeah, we've got a really good chance, because we're showing, or others, I'm observing, that so many people care. Yeah, it's imperative. We're nothing without it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a really, I think, yeah, maybe just in closing, I again really appreciated how there was a visceral kind of element of care within the work that kind of started with your practice, and that I think you kind of took us on a journey through these different parts of the work. And I'm very excited that we were able to experience it in this way and be in conversation, while also recognizing the different like limitations that you had in terms of doing the workshops and figuring out how all of that works. But I think just something simple like sending and receiving a package, you know, I mean, it's so mundane, but it's really also an important form of continuing like collectivity and sharing through something that, like you said, you can then like grow and seed and witness and have this kind of collaborative experience from different places. So yeah, I really appreciated your openness around bringing us a little bit into your world and taking on all these fantastic questions, and also yeah, just sharing with us about your practice, your views. So I wanted to thank you, as well as collaborators, Webb-Ellis, which I think just brought together a fantastic collaboration. I also just truly wanted to thank our audience for being here tonight and for your thoughtful questions.
Yeah.
I look forward to continuing the conversation, Jade. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandra.
I'm wishing everybody a lovely evening.